Greetings. This is the Reading Instruction Show. I am your host, Dr. Andy Johnson. Topic of today's presentation or conversation is called Toadies, Transactions, and Reading Instruction. And this is from my upcoming book called Making Sense of Reading Teachers Matter. Now, my purpose for writing this book was to bring clarification and additional understanding to 1, the reading process, 2, reading instruction, 3, reading research, and 4, reading policies and politics. And obviously, I think there's a great lack of understanding related to these things. This I call the great ununderstanding or goo theory. And as we learned in Book 1, theories are used to explain a set of facts and to understand phenomena. Now, goo theory is the only way that I can account for the very expensive and pseudoscientific science of reading mandates that will end up impeding students' ability to create meaning with print. And while science is involved with these mandates, it's a very limited type of science used to ask a very narrow range of questions. And while research is cited, it's either A, data and not research, B, research that has been misinterpreted or overinterpreted, and C, selected bits of research. It's the goo. Now, movies and sequels, despite all the smiling kids used as props for the pictures and the silvery promises of Sylvester McMonkey McBean, science of reading mandates will have a negative impact on literacy and learning. Students will be less able to think and use literacy for real-world purposes. And they'll be less motivated to read good books. Gaps in reading achievement will widen. And how can I be so certain? Well, you could certainly ask any kid who's forced to sit in a structured literacy class for 60 minutes or more every day. You certainly could do that. You could ask them what they like about reading class and ask them what they've learned in reading class. Ask them what they're reading and ask them to describe something they've read. And of course, this would be anecdotal evidence of the negative impact of science of reading mandates. Anecdotal evidence, and that's not very good evidence. You could also sit for a week in a first grade classroom using structured literacy. How much joy do you see? How often are students using literacy for real life purposes? And how long does it take before you want to leave that classroom? That too would be anecdotal evidence. And while this kind of evidence is powerful, it can be subjected to misinterpretation and not generalizable. Now, the science of reading insists that only evidence-based instruction be used to teach reading. And we all agree that evidence is important. However, here in Minnesota, as in other states, state reading laws were made based not on evidence, rather on testimony. Testimony is not the same as evidence. Testimony is selected people coming before other selected people and saying selected things. Testimony is like baking a cake. When what you get is based on what you put in. And in the case of the READ Act here in Minnesota, what you got was a half-baked law mandating what teachers must teach, how it must be taught, when it must be taught, and what you cannot say under any circumstances. Now, figure 3 shows what happened when kindly old Mrs. Peterson used illegal reading instruction in her first grade classroom. On a larger scale, we've seen this movie before, and it did not have a happy ending. The movie was part of the No Child Left Behind Act and the Reading First initiative. $6 billion of taxpayer money was spent on things that had no impact on children's ability to comprehend text. Imagine that. That's a very sad ending. It was a billion-dollar boondoggle. Billions of dollars were wasted on what most literacy experts could have told you up front wouldn't work. In fact, they did tell you. In 2002, the National Council of Teachers of English. But policymakers weren't much inclined to listen, you see. They wouldn't listen to people who would disagree with their preconceived idea. Besides, they had testimony. They had ample testimony. Now, here in Minnesota, the most recent sequel to this movie is called The Read Act. It's only a $100 million boondoggle. At the state level, you can get your boondoggles much cheaper. Bargain basement boondoggles at the state level. Yes, you can. Who needs health care and nutrition for kids? Who needs small class sizes, good books to read, professional working conditions, and legitimate professional development for teachers when you can get yourself a first-rate boondoggle? Big publishing's got to eat, am I right? Now, note to who's ever publishing this book that I'm writing on. I'm not including you in my critical analysis of big publishing in what I just said. You're kind and benevolent. And since you're publishing my book, you're obviously intelligent beyond human recognition. And the acquisition editor who decided this book should be published, you will someday be recognized for the great mind that you are. Perhaps there might even be a Pulitzer Prize in the future. Now that, my friends, is an example of toadyism, and it's part of the goo problem. Toadies sometimes call themselves consultants. They promote methods and say things that just happen to coincide with the products and services being sold by big publishing. Quite a coincidence, yes? Right and wrong are not determined based on what's right and wrong, rather by what will sell. Toadies are strongly in support of the current thing. They highly recommend that which will generate revenue. And if state legislatures were convinced that pinning clothespins on the children's ears enhanced reading, and if clothespin mandates were passed, you'd soon have a gaggle of toadies lining up to train teachers how to put clothespins on children's ears and declaring clothespins products to be research-based. That is the nature of toadyism. Now, I admit, I am not above such toady transactions. Almost anybody will be a toady if the price is right. The only difference between me and the current horde of educational toadies is the price. My price is quite a bit higher, you see. Now, I often ask myself, what would that price be? How much would you have to pay me to be a literacy toady? Realistically, I could be bought for about $25 million. That's my price. For $25 million, I too would be a consultant to shill your products. I too will do infomercials disguised as professional development. I too will have a product-based answer in search of a problem. I too will help develop products that are so complicated that teachers have to be trained before they're able to use them. And by the way, you train animals, you educate humans. And I justify my $25 million toadyism by saying I'm using the money to help people. Yes, I would. I want to be very upfront about my toadyism. My price is $25 million. So if someday you see a book written by me describing the wonders of a specific for-profit method, product, or service, you'll know that I'm living large someplace. But this exemplifies the transactional nature of toadyism. Toadies say things because there's money to be made, and they don't say other things because it might impact sales. It's passion with a price tag. It's knowledge for sale. So I'll leave you with two questions. You must ask yourself, what is your price for becoming a toady? And what's the ultimate price to our society for the current epidemic of toadyism? This has been the Reading Instruction Show. I am your host, Dr. Andy Johnson.